I'd like you to consider that over your lifetime, all the decisions that you've made, big ones, small ones, work ones, family ones, personal ones, and across all of those decisions, have you ever made a bad one? Of course we have, right? We've all made bad decisions, but I want to kind of drill in on that a little bit. Have you ever made a bad decision and someone else paid the consequences? Maybe you paid consequences too. Maybe you didn't pay consequences. Only those other folks paid the consequences, right? Because there are times, right, where our emotions kind of get us and they kind of build up inside of us, and we become very driven to do something or to choose something or to behave a certain way. And maybe in all of our excitement, we just weren't thinking about other people. We just didn't think about it, and we made that choice. But also, if we're honest with ourselves, in some of those moments where we get kind of spun up that way, the idea that someone else might pay the cost comes into our mind, but we quickly push it down. It'll be fine. We'll sort it out. It'll be okay. And then it's not okay. And I truly believe that most of us want to make good decisions most of the time. I don't think that we commonly set out to make decisions where we're actually harming other people, right? But the reality is although our decisions are our own, very rarely are the outcomes of those decisions entirely our own. In fact, very commonly, even the consequences of those decisions hit other people. And so the question I guess I have, or the question I've been thinking through this week, is that why does that happen? Like, why do we do that? We don't set out to harm the people we love or even harm strangers sometimes, but it happens. And it really ties into what we've been kind of talking about starting last week, right? This idea of this baggage that we have, this weight that we carry that's just inside of us, right? That, as we go through life, we build up emotional scars, right? And we don't really think about it this way, but the reality is that those emotional scars that build up, they start to change the way we think. They start to change our view of the world. They start to shape how we see the world. And we start to realize that, or maybe we don't start to realize. What starts to happen is those emotions and those scars start driving our thinking, and we don't even realize it. And we so often are making choices driven by kind of overwhelming emotions and just the things that have built up, that gunk that just gets inside of us. Right? And so in this series, what we're doing is we're kind of looking at some of those kinds of issues, like, trying to understand where they come from, but also how they drive our thinking, and most importantly, how do we move past those? How do we get free from those? Some kind of real practical things we can do to kind of let go of some of that stuff. And see, and one of the challenges of decision making is that often our decisions are driven by the gunk that's inside of us, and then we make decisions that have repercussions on other people, and we see that, and dealing with that gets really hard. So what do? We kind of stuff it down and try not to look at it too closely, try not to think about it. And so what does that do? It adds more gunk inside of us, kind of feeding into the cycle of kind of this continuing process of making decisions we'd rather not make, or just struggling through life in a way that we didn't have to. Right? Because one of the analogies we used last week was that if we look at life as a journey, well, like any journey, the more baggage you have to carry, the harder that journey is going to be. And that's as true for life as it is for anything. And so if we can really kind of embrace freedom from that baggage, we can start to enjoy the journey. Because if we're honest with ourselves, huge sections of our journey of life are not what we want them to be. But no matter where you are in that journey, it can be better. There is a path to greater freedom. There is a chance for us to actually be free of those things if we can really understand what's going on inside of us and how we move past it. So what I wanted to do today is, as we kind of continue in this series, I want to talk about one of the most famous people from the Old Testament. If you've been a church person, you definitely heard this guy before. Even if you have not been a church person, there's a good chance you've heard of this person before. Samson. Samson's known for being strong, right? A great warrior, a defender of his people. He's also known for really bad relationships. Because if I say Samson, what name comes to mind? Delilah, right? Samson and Delilah were such a mess, they become a metaphor for bad relationships, right? Now, we're going to talk about Samson and Delilah next week. But it turns out that Samson's bad relationships and bad decision-making didn't start with Delilah. It kind of culminates with Delilah. He actually has been on a journey like that for a while. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that the narrative about Samson comes to us from the book of Judges. Right? Now, Judges is the ancient Old Testament, right? So we're talking 3,000 years ago. And again, for context, I always like to remind us that that's like 1,000 years before Jesus, right? So that is way back in time, right? That's part of the ancient world. And there's some things important to understand about the ancient world, right? The ancient world is a world anchored in violence, right? If you want something, you use violence to get it. It's also a world where women are not really valued at all. In fact, the most cynical view is women are seen closer to property than actually people. And so there's a lot of ugly things that happen because of that time frame and the way many things were viewed. Human life was considered cheap. It wasn't important. And so that's kind of the world that Samson lives in. And if you remember last week, we talked about Gideon being part of that Judges, where Samson is the most famous of the judges. You remember that in the period of the Judges, which again are around 3,000 years ago, it's a period of a few hundred years where in ancient Israel, there is no kind of political leader. There is no king. There are parts of it where it says, everyone just did what was right in their own eyes. That's not going to go well, right? People are just walking around doing whatever they want. But the one thing that the people did have were these people who were called judges, and judges were defenders of their people. And that was really their role. They didn't really lead the same way in most cases. They really were much more about defense. And that's what Samson was. So he's this great warrior whose kind of purpose is defending his people. And at the time frame that Samson lives in, his people are actually occupied by a foreign power. It's a group of people known as the Philistines. Now, if you read through the Old Testament, you know that the Philistines and the ancient Israelites, they were kind of constantly having issues with each other. But in this time period, the Philistines are the ones that are on top. So the Philistines have moved into Samson's homeland, and they've actually become occupiers. Now, as far as we can tell, it's a period of time where the violence is not actively going on. That there's kind of there's kind of skirmishes along the way, but basically the Philistines are in charge, and Samson and his people are the underlings. But Samson is responsible for defending his people along the way. And so that's what it looks like as we step into all this. And so as we meet Samson, he's actually a young man. And although he is a great warrior, and he's incredibly strong, and he does, amazing things when it comes to battle and the violence, he also has an issue. He's really impulsive. Imagine that, a young man who is impulsive, who makes bad decisions. Never went through it myself. And I will also tell you do not have to be young to be impulsive and make bad decisions either. But basically, we find that for Samson, on the surface, it seems like his decisions are simply driven by, oh, I want that. Oh, I want that. But if we look at it more closely as we go along, you can see that Samson is searching for something. He's searching to look important. He's searching to feel important. That despite his incredible capabilities as a warrior, he still seems to struggle with how people see him. And as a result, that leads him to make lots of bad decisions along the way. And so as we meet him, he's actually traveling from his home city to another city, a city named Timnah. It's about 4 miles or so from his home, and he's traveling by foot, so it's a pretty hardy walk to get out there and to get back. And the city of Timnah is a Philistine-controlled city. So what is he doing? He's taking a stroll into the city of the enemy, because that's a good idea, right? And so the narrative tells us this. Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When Samson returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. Now keep in mind, just in case you missed what I was talking about, right? She's part of the Philistines. Philistines are the conquerors. Samson is an ancient Israelite, the conquered. And he wants to marry this woman. And he says that because he tells his parents that, and the parents kind of push back, like, you're supposed to be defending our people from those folks. Is this really the best choice? I mean, there's no girl around here that you want to be with. You have to marry her. But Samson keeps pushing back. In fact, Samson says this. He says, Samson said to his father, "Get her for me. She's the right one for me." And as you read that or as you hear that, you think, oh, maybe this is like a Romeo and Juliet thing, right? Like, you got the Capulets and the Montagues, if you remember your Shakespeare, or the American version, Hatfield McCoys sort of thing. Like, that's what this situation is. But maybe, just like in Romeo and Juliet, that Samson and this girl have fallen in love on the sly, right? And that he really wants to marry her now. And he's not going to let social expectations and family differences keep him from this girl. Now, that's possible, right? I mean, what a romantic story, love overcoming opposition. But as we carry on with the narrative, we learn something really important. It says, Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. Great, so he's taking mom and dad to meet the girl, right? Then Samson went down and talked to the woman, and he liked her. What does that tell you? He had never met her. He had never even met her. Yet he's demanding that this marriage come together. And I think there's a couple things going on there. One of which is I think Samson is attracted to dangerous things. Right? And what relationship could possibly be more dangerous than this? But also, I think there's something much more going on. Why do you think he wants to marry her? Because she's hot. And I can prove that. That's not just my opinion. I can back that up a little bit. Right? Keep in mind that the narratives of ancient Israel, most of the narratives of the Old Testament, take place in the Middle East. Right? And that is a particular culture. That is a particular group of people who have a relatively similar look to one another. What we know now is that the group of people who are known in the Bible as the Philistines had actually migrated from the Mediterranean, basically kind of the modern area of Greece. So she would have looked very different. She would have been exotic. Right? So not only is the relationship dangerous and she's attractive, but she's exotic. And one of the things we'll see that's something that is a real kind of tripping point for Samson is exotic women. And so he goes through this process and he demands that this happens. And what we see happening and what playing out in Samson's life is this very dangerous decision process. And I would love to take credit for this, but what I'm about to go through, I actually heard someone else say, so I just want to give you credit for that. Get that person credit for it. This is Samson's decision process. I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it. Ever do that? I want it. I deserve it. I can handle it. He saw her. She's gorgeous. She's exotic. It's a little dangerous. I want it. I'm a defender of my people. Look at all I do for everyone. I deserve this. But Samson, this is like really dangerous. I can handle it. I got it. Do you ever drive by, a car dealership and you see that car? Like, man, I want that. And man, I have been working so hard for so long. Man, I deserve that. But then your partner says to you, but like, we're just kind of financially making it now. We can't handle those payments. No, I can handle it. We'll work. You know what? Once we have to deal with it, we'll figure it out. It could be big decisions like that, or it could be small decisions. It gets to the end of the work week. You're a little tired. You head to the bar. You have a couple drinks. You think about ordering another one. Going, I want it. And man, it's been a hard week. I deserve it. Someone says, but man, are you good to drive? Oh, I can handle it. Car knows the way home, right? Right? We all do things like that. And to be clear, I did lots of things like that. I still do sometimes. Try to do it less. Right? But that is a struggle that we all have. And the thing about Samson here is that Samson's case, making this decision, he probably will be okay, right? He is such a fierce warrior, he can probably fight off most of what's going to come along. But what about his family that he is dragging into this? What about this young lady who has very little to say about her own life? How's she going to do in the midst of all this? How's her family going to do in all this? This is an incredibly dangerous and volatile situation. Will they be all right? You know, when we look at decisions that we make about financial things that drag us into very difficult situations, is our family going to hold up okay? Is our marriage going to hold up okay? You know, we hop behind the wheel to drive with too many drinks. Is everyone else going to be okay? And there's a long list of decisions that look like that. I'm sure we all could do a great big show and tell over I want it, I deserve it, I can handle it, things that didn't really work out so well. You know, and I don't say this to make you feel guilty. You know, maybe I do this to out myself because I just struggle with, bad decision making so much, right? But the thing that I want us to see is that we're all doing this. And what I love about the story of Samson is it's a really easy narrative to look at that paints this picture so clearly that we're doing things like this. And it's keeping us from living in the fullness of life that God invites us to be a part of. And what we find is that when we start doing a series of bad decision making, it can really begin a downward spiral. There becomes one bad decision after another, after another. And as we'll see with Samson, his initial decision to want to marry this woman begins a significant downward spiral for him that will actually leave a trail of damage behind him. Because eventually the time comes for them to get married, so they go forward with the marriage. And in that time frame, marriages are not like just a couple of hours. Our marriage celebration lasts like a week. And so what he's going to do is he's going to go down here to this Philistine city. His parents are going to come along with him, right? They're going to have this big marriage celebration. And one of the things that are part of that kind of tradition is that the groom has like an entourage, like a group of young men who are with him. And so they actually assign him 30 Philistine young men. So here he is hanging out with 30 of the enemy for a week in this celebration. And all he has to do is get through this week, get married, and at least we can avoid the immediate problem. But again, it's a week-long celebration. It has lots of food, but you know what else it has? Lots to drink. What could possibly go wrong? And so what would be the smart thing for Samson? Let's take Samson at his word. Let's say he really does love this girl and he really wants to marry her. The smartest thing for him to do, low profile. Keep it cool. Don't do anything that creates a mess. Just get through it. But Samson just can't do that. Because Samson needs to be seen as important. He needs to be the focus. So he makes this really impulsive decision. He makes this way over the top bet with the other 30 guys. He says this. Samson says, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you can give me the answer within 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. If you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes." Now, there is so much packed in there right now that tells us so much about Samson. First of all, one thing that's important to remember is that, we see clothing as, relatively speaking, inexpensive. In that time frame, clothing was not inexpensive. All clothing was expensive. People only had a few pieces of clothing. But the clothing that he's describing here is clothing that's so expensive, most people cannot afford it. This is the kind of clothing that important, high-powered people wear. And so Samson is convinced that he can actually win this bet, and he can get access to this clothing, because Samson cannot afford this clothing. Right? But if he can get this, he would not just have one set of this clothing, he'd have 30. Oh my goodness, how important must he be? How powerful must he be? But let's think of the structure of the bet, right? If he wins, each of those 30 guys has to buy one set of clothing, and he gets 30. But if he wins, what does he have to do? Buy 30 sets of clothing and give them each one. He can't afford one set of this clothing. He's just made a bet that he has no way to pay for if he loses, because he is so certain he's not going to lose. And in fact, he can't make it simple. He can't say, hey, if you guys have until the end of today or till tomorrow to figure it out, I'll give you 7 days to figure it out. You'll never figure it out, even in 7 days, because that's a big, bold thing to do, right? So he makes it really dangerous. And he just wants to be seen as important, and he wants to be hanging it out there. And what's interesting is that he kind of justifies it again, right? I want to look important. I want to be seen as important, and I work so hard defending my people, right? I deserve this, and I'm smarter than these guys are, and I can handle it, and I'll get it done because I don't have to worry about being able to pay for it because I'm not going to have to pay for it anyway. It's a gamble I can't lose. Famous last words. And in fairness to Samson, he does come up with a pretty challenging riddle. The riddle is this: out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. Now, it's a really good riddle because it's based on a personal experience that he had that no one else saw. He had actually been traveling at one point, comes across the carcass of a dead lion. In that lion, bees had built a hive, and bees make honey. And oddly, he actually reached inside the lion and ate some of the honey. Ick, by the way. Not that I don't like honey, but about pulling it out of a dead lion doesn't seem like a good idea. Right? So that's the structure, right? The lion eats things, but there's something to eat. Right? The lion is strong, but inside there's something sweet. So unless you saw that happen, you're not going to get the answer to that. And so he is so confident. But here we see again people having to pay for his choices. Right? What was meant to be a happy 7-day celebration, his need to look big and important and strong. Certainly those 30 guys aren't having a good time because they really can't pay this debt either. And so they figure after a few days they can't figure it out. So they go to the young woman that Samson's there to marry. And they basically start going on her going, did you bring this guy here to rip us off? Did you bring this guy here to make us look stupid? Either you give us the answer to this riddle or we will kill you and your family. And they mean it. And so now, she didn't know Samson before all this went down, right? So she goes to Samson going, hey, would you tell me the answer to the riddle? Because she's just trying to save herself and her family. And Samson initially won't tell her. And so what happens now for the next several days, as opposed to Samson having a good time, just enjoying the celebration, her enjoying the celebration, she's crying all the time, and he's, dealing with that. No one's having a good time. All because of a stupid thing like a bet. Because he needs to fill that hole. Despite of what he's done in his life, despite what he's accomplished, he has this need to try to fill that hole and be seen as important and to look important and to one-up someone else. And so finally, as they near the end of the celebration, he finally gives in and he tells the young lady the answer to the riddle. And so to save her family, she goes and tells the other guys the answers to the riddle, who then show up to Samson. What's stronger than a lion? What's sweeter than honey? And Samson has now lost that bet that he couldn't lose. And he can't pay for it. So now, what's he going to do? If he doesn't pay for it, right, he doesn't really have to worry so much about violence against him because he can deal with violence, but he's going to look like a fool. He's going to look at somebody who can't back up his word, can't back up what he says. So to find a solution, he's Samson, right? He can beat anybody. He wanders off to another Philistine town, goes and attacks 30 different wealthy men, steals their clothes, which is kind of weird, right? And then comes back and pays his debt. But then out of his anger, he just kind of runs off. Doesn't say goodbye to the young lady, doesn't say goodbye to anybody. He's just gone. And again, thinking of this time frame, what he's just done is he's just left this young lady stranded at the altar. In that culture, if a bride shows up and the groom doesn't, it's a disgrace to her family. So he's thrown her into that situation. And so her father, to a deal with that, just very quickly marries her off to one of the guys that were in the entourage. So now she's just been pushed off and married off to someone else. And Samson's nowhere to be found. And then after some period of time, Samson finally comes back saying, hey, I'm here to see my wife. And he finds out that she's not his wife. She's someone else's wife. And in very Samson fashion, he suddenly sees himself entirely as the victim here. He's furious. Like, I can't believe these people have done this to me. He says this. He says, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines, and I will really harm them. Look at all they've done to me. Look at what they've put me through. Look at what a challenge I have. when really he's been the one stirring it all up because of his internal discontent, his need, despite all that he has done, and he does many great things. Despite all of that, he just needed to fill that hole. He keeps taking dangerous chances. He keeps dragging other people into it with him. And so finally they get even. And when Samson gets even, he gets really even. He decides he's going to destroy their entire food supply. So he heads out to their farms and burns their fields. Heads out to their vineyards and burns their vineyards. Heads out to the orchards, burns the orchards. Which means it destroys all of that city's food, not just for that year, because orchards and vineyards take years to build up. And so he's now left that entire city without food. And they're furious at Samson. But they know they can't take Samson. So what are they going to do? They blame her. And they kill her. And they kill her father. And yet, Samson could handle it. Samson's fine. I mean, he lost the girl, but he's fine. And think of this chain of events that's happened. This initial event of, woo, she's exotic and attractive, and I just got to have her. And all these decisions down the line. What's the net result of it? Well, Samson lost the girl. Right? 30 strangers who had nothing to do with any of this lost their clothes. Right? Which is, go tell that, honey, I got to tell you what happened at work today. Right? That's going to be weird, right? The people of Timnah lost their food, not just for that year, but for many years. And this girl and her father lost their lives. Yep, Samson could handle it. But how many other people are paying for his decision? And at what level are they paying for his decision? Now, we might be tempted to defend Samson. Like how could he possibly know it would go this wrong? Right? And I agree. I think it would have been hard to predict these specific set of events. But let's face it, when he made that initial decision, he knew something was going to happen. Right? Something's got to happen, and it's probably not going to be good. And the people around him had to pay for it. And what I want us to encourage us to consider is that when we make those decisions we make to try to fill that hole inside, to try to be seen as more important, or, I clean my house better than anyone else. I keep my schedule better than anyone else. I work harder than anyone else. And these things that may be good things for themselves, but when we do them for unhealthy reasons, they have repercussions. And so often, those repercussions are on the other people in our lives. And so as I get ready to wrap up here, what I want to remind you of is that verse that I read at the beginning today and we read last week. Right? You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Right? God created you as a person of honor, to be a person of honor, someone who is wonderful. Right? The psalmist even goes on to say that, God, your creations are wonderful. And the people around you are fearfully and wonderfully made, worthy of honor, wonderful. But when we make our decisions, particularly those decisions that are driven by emotions that we are wrestling with a negative self-view, of self-doubt, of a desire and need for more, do we maintain that mindset of I am fearfully and wonderfully made? I am created by God as out of his love for me to be a person of honor, to be a person who is wonderful. And do my decisions reflect that view of other people, that the person next to me, the person that I love so much I married, they are fearfully and wonderfully made. My children who I love so much are so fearfully and wonderfully made. The people I encounter around me, even if they can be really challenging sometimes, are fearfully and wonderfully made, loved by God, and we are called to love them. Is that our thinking when we make our choices? Is that our thinking when we make our decisions? And see what happens if we don't hold on to that struggle we have inside ends up creating harm. And as we see the harm we create, if we don't deal with it, we're just feeding right back into that cycle of kind of getting a heavier burden inside and making more decisions we will regret, making more decisions that other people will pay for. So the last thing I want to do here is kind of ask you kind of 4 quick questions that all relate to one another. Like, what big decision or series of decisions have you made that negatively impacted other people? In fact, I want to go one step further. Is there something you're thinking about right now that you're kind of justifying and you know could hurt someone else, but you're kind of leaning into it? You know, and as you think about that decision that you made in the past or that you're thinking about making, who paid the price for that? Who paid the biggest price? Who dealt with the biggest repercussions? Or who will, if you continue on something you might be thinking about? And the question that I try to ask myself when I realize I've done that or I'm about to do that, I ask myself, why is this decision so important to me? Like, what is driving this decision? If there's a chance that I'm going to harm someone else with it, why is it so important that I need to do this? What inside of me is motivating that? Maybe I should address that instead. And then finally, and I think we've all done this, we've made decisions that have really harmed people we care about. When are you going to talk to them about it? When are you going to own your piece of it? When am I going to own my piece of it? When do we go talk to them and said, you know, I made this choice and I knew it would hurt you, or maybe I didn't know it would hurt you, but my choices led to that outcome. First we say we're sorry, and then we repair it as best we can. Because if we don't do those things, if we don't understand our motives for our choices, if we don't recognize who we've harmed, and if we don't deal with the harm we've created, it just keeps feeding into that cycle of darkness. But if we can embrace it, we can actually get ourselves out of it, and we start to kind of move on that path, onto that journey with a little bit less baggage, on a journey that's a little bit lighter, and enjoy more of the life that we're given, right? That to live a life where we reflect the fact that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. God loves you so dearly, so desperately. He loves you exactly as you are, and he just wants you to be and live in the fullness that you've been created for. So let's embrace that as we kind of go forward from this moment.